This is an extraordinary maze of subterranean passages. We keep coming across these incredible heavy doors. They're like the kind you would find in a bank vault. And these passages just go on and on. Apparently this house was used by Mu'tasim and Hannibal Gaddafi, two of Gaddafi's sons. No one we're with here has any idea where these passages end up.
And Lindsay joins us now live from Tripoli. What's going on there now?
I think it's an extremely volatile and dangerous situation here at the moment, Krishnan. We've been watching smoke rising southeast of where we are staying. I think that is probably Abu Salim, which is the part of the city which Colonel Gaddafi's forces fled to when they left that Bab al-Azizia compound. There is still fighting going on there. That story that you've just seen, it would have been longer and we would have got it to London more quickly. But as we were editing it in our hotel room, 3 shots came straight through the window. They went straight up. We were on the 22nd floor. They hit the ceiling. We then all had to hit the floor. None of our team was hurt. We are all fine. But it meant that we had to crawl out on our hands and knees. We couldn't finish editing our story. I think that shows you just how volatile the situation here is in Tripoli tonight. I started as an aid worker. I worked for Oxfam in Latin America in the late 1970s, and then I went to Africa and I worked for UNICEF, the UN Children's Fund. And then I decided that I wasn't very useful as an aid worker because I didn't know anything very much, and I just really wanted to find out about these countries. And also, I mean, I wasn't a nurse, I wasn't a doctor, I didn't know anything about agriculture. All I could do was read and write and ask questions in a couple of languages. So I thought I'd better become a journalist. Well, I've never seen myself as a war correspondent. I see myself as a foreign correspondent. So I've covered all sorts of stories and conflicts. I suppose the first conflict I really remember going to was in Mozambique in the early 1980s. I believe you only have one lifetime, so you might as well be where history is happening. This is the history of our time, and I want to be where that history is happening. Now, that isn't always war. Sometimes it could be, sometimes obviously it's a natural disaster, or sometimes it could be a vote in Parliament. But so often, history is what's happening in the Middle East, what's happening in Libya, in Syria, in Egypt. And I just want to be there. I don't want to be at home watching it on the television. I want to be there seeing it for myself with my own eyes, and I want to be talking directly to the people who are experiencing that history. I want to hear their stories. I want to understand what's going on.
People, they were hiding on the houses. People working, fighting for Gaddafi. They were themselves hiding in the houses. In the houses.
In Bin Jawad.
In Bin Jawad. When we just enter, they start to shoot us from everywhere.
What sticks in your mind is always the people. It's always the individuals who you meet. And it's the, in Libya, going up to a group of fighters on the front line, and there's a very young man, and he comes up to me, and he says,
"This is the weapon, something missing."
You've got something missing from your weapon? I said, "I'm terribly sorry about that. Which bit?" He said, "I don't know which bit." And I said, "Well, what are you going to do?" And he said, "Well, I'm going to wait until somebody else comes and brings the bit for my weapon." And at this point, I looked at him, I thought, how old is this boy? I said, "How old are you?" He said, "I'm 17. And then I heard myself say, "Does your mother know you're here?" And, you just come across situations like that. And then another young man on that same front line in Libya, I asked him why he was fighting, and suddenly he's quoting JF Kennedy at me. "Ask not what your country does for you, but what you can do for your country." Why have you come here to fight?
I'm not better than my brothers who are dying here trying to save my country. And believe me, it's not what country can do for you, but what can you do for your country.
I could go into hundreds of those kind of people who I've met. But It's also to do with understanding. I think that, for me, I want to do the frontline reporting. I want to be there, but I also want to understand and explain this. I want to put it into context. I hate the way that journalism is often divided up between people who are out there doing all, reporting on all the shooting and the bang bang, many of whom are young men because they like that sort of thing. And then the pundits who sit in the studio and talk at great length and usually very tediously about what it all means. And they've never been there and never go there. I want to put those two things together. I want to be there on the front line, get those stories, have that experience, and yet also try and make sense of it, because I think that people often watch the television and watch these stories and they don't understand it, and they just think those are all crazy people killing each other. Well, they're not all crazy people killing each other. These wars are happening for a reason, and they're happening because of these big shifts in our world, particularly after the Cold War. I want to be able to understand and explain that, so that people have a sense of what drives those who are going through those wars.
This is the most dangerous engagement India companies had in Fallujah.
I think it's really hard to find the truth in a war, and quite often in a war, all you can do is tell the story of the little piece that you see, that little slice. Now, for example, in 2004, I was embedded with the Americans in Fallujah, in Iraq. Now, it was some of the most exciting war corresponding I've ever done. We were in a unit with armored vehicles. It was the most intense combat I've ever been in. It was extraordinary. I mean, there were bullets flying everywhere. There were things blowing up. It was just amazing. But what did I really understand or learn? Well, I understood something about the strategy and tactics of the Americans in Fallujah.
Gonna do 5 seconds of suppression. All right? Slow on M16s, like 2 bursts. That way, Cole Pelton is gonna show me where the fires come from, and I can look at the building. All right? Ready, set, go, hands up.
And I understood about how, when they found their enemy, first of all, they used suppressive fire to get them to go down, and then they called in airstrikes. And, I learned how they waged war. I learned the ballet of war. But I didn't learn anything about what the war was about from the point of view of the people of Fallujah. They've made a tactical withdrawal to this rooftop here, waiting for air power to come in and bomb the remaining insurgents.
5 seconds.
A few weeks later, after it was over, it was too dangerous for me to go in as a foreigner, but we, my organisation, Channel 4 News, we had an Iraqi doctor who worked for us, and he went in and made some films and told the story from the point of view of the people of Fallujah, the people who were on the end of the weapons which I had seen fired by the Americans. And by putting those two together, you got some idea of the truth, or of what, at least of what had happened. But as one correspondent in a war, you can only ever see that little bit that you're seeing, and you should never believe that what you see is the whole truth. We understand that in Damascus, people have started going to the shops and buying as much as they can. They think that this assault is now inevitable. They don't know how long it's going to go on. But the government, I think, is very confident that it will be fine, because there's been such emphasis that this is going to be a short strike on a few targets. So I think that President Assad and his closest cohorts, they're just going to hunker down and wait for it to be gone. But the people in the opposition we've been speaking to, and the refugees who I've been meeting here today, they have a very different hope. They hope that someone, anyone, is now going to come and save them. No, you can't fix the situation. I mean, today I was in a refugee camp, and people were coming around me and asking me questions. And they were saying, you know, are the Americans going to bomb Syria? When do you think that we will be able to go back to our homes in Syria? And can you get us blankets? And we don't have medicines, and can you help? And that's always really difficult, because of course you want to help. And I mean, I can remember on one occasion, this was in Kosovo, and it was in the first, it must have been the first or second day after NATO came into Kosovo. I had been in Serbia, and I had come in, and we came across these wounded Kosovars. They had stepped on landmines, and they were lying in this truck, and their legs were half blown off. And I couldn't just leave them there. That wasn't possible. But, you know, we filmed them. They wanted to be filmed. And then I felt very lucky that, that I had previously been an aid worker, because it meant I had contacts. And so what we did was we filmed them, and then we went off to the UN. And luckily, the person in charge of the UN emergency department was an old friend of mine. And so I said to him, I said, okay, this is your first test. You have to go and get these people and rescue them. And we left our local fixer, producer, Dushka, who happened to be, he was a trainee doctor, he was a medical student, and so he had actually been able to patch them up a bit. And we left him with the UN, and he guided them back to the people, and they managed to get them and put them in hospital. So every now and then, in an acute situation, you can do something. And for me, that's really important.
A blue Volkswagen passed. A few minutes later, we realized the car which followed it had been hit. The Marines wouldn't cross into enemy territory, but our translator, Mohammed Fatnan, insisted on going to investigate. Thank goodness he did. As he ran back towards us, we realized that something terrible had happened. 6-year-old Zahra Abdel Samia had been in the back of the car which was shot. She had a head wound. As the Marines cleaned up her injury, we learned that her aunt and the driver were also injured. They didn't want us to film. We pointed out that they had shot her, and it was only because of Mohammed that they had any chance of saving her now.
So this is all that remains of one of Saddam's palaces. Now it's a communications center for the Marines. They've moved in, most of it's destroyed, and whatever's left they'll use. They, of course, are joyous and triumphant. I have to say, after what we've seen with the little girl who was injured and the other people, it's very hard to feel that this is another great day for Baghdad. Well, there's a fashion in reporting to look as if you care when you don't. I would never, ever cry on camera. That would be disgusting. If I'm going to cry, I will do that in privacy. That's my feeling. That is nothing to do with my reporting. I hope that my reporting is informed by what I believe in. But my own emotion is not important. It's the emotion of the people who I'm reporting on. That's what's important. And I am very suspicious of those who cry on camera, because I suspect that they're doing it for effect, because I think that if you have real feelings, then you should have the dignity to keep them to yourself. It's the same as people who flinch on camera, you know? In the middle of the piece to camera, they go as if they've just been shot. What a load of old nonsense. If you are in a position where you have to flinch, then you may be killed, and therefore you should move. You are in the wrong place. And if there is the sound of shooting around, then you should stand there. You should not flinch, because that's just showing off.
On the diplomatic front, the Arab League, we understand, is now calling for a no-fly zone over Libya. To be, I'm not sure what that sound is, Lindsay, but I mean, perhaps, yes, you can help us with that.
That sound was gunfire, but that was gunfire, Krishnan, but I think that it was probably the gunfire of over-enthusiasm, which you hear quite a lot here in Benghazi. It certainly doesn't put us at any risk. It was in this courtyard that the killing took place. They gathered the prisoners here. The guards stood on the roofs and machine-gunned them down. That was the turning point, the massacre at Abu Salim. I think that covering these kind of situations, conflicts and also natural disasters, it has made me philosophically very pessimistic. After I was in Rwanda, I spent a lot of time thinking about things. I spent a lot of time reading Holocaust literature, read Primo Levi and so on. And I came to this idea that the humankind is not perfectible. Philosophically, I'm very pessimistic about humankind. But I think that luckily, by personality, I'm quite optimistic. I think that somehow or other, for no particular reason, I'm okay, I'm quite cheerful. And that, somehow or other, those two things together mean that it's okay, I keep going. Of course I get miserable, but I think that if I didn't get miserable and unhappy about the things I've seen, I wouldn't be a human being, I'd be a psychopath. I think that being miserable and upset about seeing terrible things is normal. And I'm glad I'm normal. But then I am able to get away from that, and I am able to enjoy things. I mean, you know, you might not think of it to look at me now, but I love clothes. I love getting nice clothes. I have hundreds of scarves. I like earrings. I like my house at home. I love to decorate my house. I have a garden. I'm not saying I'm good at doing the gardening. I love doing the gardening. You know, I love to have that other life, and I think that you need that, or I need that, because otherwise you go a bit nutty. And people might think I'm nutty, but I don't think I am. I think I'm all right, because I think I managed to balance those things out, and because my philosophical pessimism somehow balances with my psychological optimism. Oh, Syria is unbelievably complicated. And, you know, I have not been into Syria because at the moment I can't get a visa for Damascus, and because my friend Marie Colvin was killed in Homs near the beginning of the war after she had gone in with the rebels. And so after that I found that I could not go in. I couldn't do it. It was beyond me. It was beyond my danger threshold.
An absolutely ferocious shelling this morning, starting at about 6:30 in the morning. I'm on a street. Half the houses on this street have been hit, including the one I'm in, and lost the top floor. The Syrians are not allowing civilians to leave. Anyone who gets on the street, if they're not hit by a shell, they're sniped.
This is a desperately sad reminder of the risks that journalists take to inform the world of what is happening and the dreadful events in Syria.
The night before she died, we were on Skype together, and she said, "Lindsay, this is the worst we've ever seen." And she described the situation in Homs and a baby who she had watched dying. And I said, "Marie, what is your exit strategy? How are you going to get out?" And she said, "That's the terrible thing, Lindsay, there is no way out." And so I think about that a lot. And I cannot, of course I can't believe that it was worth it. Marie is dead, my friend is dead, the war in Syria carries on. But she believed it was worth it, and she believed that that is what we do and what we should do. And so it is also important to keep faith with her. For me, it's very important to keep faith with her. But I was never as brave as she was, and I'm even less brave now.
Journalists covering combat shoulder great responsibilities and face difficult choices. Sometimes they pay the ultimate price.
If you do the kind of work that we do, the colors are brighter, the mountains are clearer. Everything just seems so much sharper and more important. It's very difficult to give that up. And a lot of journalists have that problem, particularly war correspondents. They don't know what to do next. And you go through that whole thing about, is it damaging your soul and all that kind of stuff. Some people are addicted to adrenaline, but others, it's what Marie said. Anyway, this is what we do. And I still don't think that there is anything more interesting to do in life. But I think that you don't always have to do it in the same way. And I do think that there is, some of it is a young person's game. I can't walk, 30 miles up a hill in a flak jacket carrying my pack. I'm 55, I can't do that. I can't, I was in Afghanistan on an embed and I was supposed to leap over a ditch. I couldn't leap over the ditch. I could have when I was 25 or 30, but I can't now. So, there are some things that you can't do. But at the same time, I still think it's important that you should have older people doing this reporting, because young people, especially young men, they love war. And that's very dangerous. I think it's important to have people reporting who hate war because they've seen a lot of it and seen too much of it and don't find it exciting. I think it's very important that we're there as well.
We approach cautiously. The Marines had secured Saddam Hussein's Adamir Palace only a few hours earlier, and everyone was jumpy.
Usually, being arrested is the bad part of the day. But there was this occasion in Alexandria when I was unbelievably grateful to be arrested. And this was because this was right at the beginning of the Arab Spring. And people had been incredibly friendly in Alexandria, but, there was a difficult mood. It was hard to judge. And we were in a car, my team and I, and the cameraman tried to take a film of some people outside the police station. They were queuing up to find news of their sons and brothers and so on who had disappeared. And the crowd suddenly turned against us, and we didn't really understand why. Later, we heard that on television it had said that foreign journalists were, in fact, Israeli spies. And so people believed that. A mob surrounded the car. A man went like this, and people were trying to grab us. They were trying to grab the camera and trying to pull the cameraman out. Luckily, he managed to give the camera to me in the back of the car, so I had the camera under my legs. They didn't actually know where the camera was. But then they were trying to pull us out, and the window was open. And so it was an old-fashioned car with one of those, PP things that stick up for the lock. And so I put my hand over it, and then people were trying to prise my hand off it, so I was digging my nails into their hand. And it was not a nice situation. It was quite threatening. And then, alhamdulillah, the police appeared and arrested us. And we were so happy because they arrested us. They took us into the police station, and they were very kind to us. And they said, you better not go out the front because they'll have you again. So just wait for half an hour and then we'll let you out a different way. And they checked our papers and everything, and all was well.
Imagine what this was like when the battle was going on. The Israeli army came in tanks, armored personnel carriers, bulldozers. And inside all these buildings, there were snipers shooting at the soldiers. And the ordinary people, the civilians, screaming inside as their houses were bulldozed, collapsed into rubble around them.
A good war correspondent is someone who makes you understand what it feels like to live in a war, what it feels like to be the refugee carrying your baby over the border, or what it feels like to be the young fighter looking nervously out of the window with your finger on the trigger. And the good war correspondent is also the person who makes you understand why this war is happening. And the bad war correspondent is the one who makes you think that it's all very exciting, and that it's all very thrilling, and that somehow or other there is no human cost, and that all that blood is tomato ketchup. And the bad war correspondent is the one who makes you think, ooh, isn't he brave? Ooh, isn't she brave? Because the story, this film is about us. These films are about us as war correspondents, but that's not the story. The story is the people who we meet. The fighters, the refugees, the politicians, all of those people, they're the story. We are not the story. and we should not be the story. And you know what? Most of us aren't that brave. That's another thing. We're not that brave. Most of us go and get what we need and go away. I mean, the front line in Libya, I would go up to the front line for as short a time as possible, 20 minutes, an hour, and then go back, because there's no point in exposing yourself to too much danger, because then you can't tell the story. And I remember in Iraq, we were at Abu Ghraib prison, and all the doors were swinging open, all the prisoners had fled. And two men came running up to us, and one of them was just weeping and weeping, and he had been a prisoner. And the other man said to us, "Come with me, you've got to come with me." So we followed him, and he took us to the center of the prison. It was outside in the prison yard, and there was a huge mural of Saddam Hussein. And he said to the cameraman I was with, he said, "Stand behind me and film." And he reached into his pocket and he got out a pistol and he shot Saddam Hussein twice. And then he turned around and said, "I was in this prison for many years. I had tried to lead a coup against Saddam. And when I was in this prison, they forced me to paint that mural. And this day is my revenge." And I carry the bullet with me everywhere, because I think that that kind of extraordinary moment, when that man had never told that story to anyone, maybe his wife, that was all. You have to have a certain toughness, because yes, you do see horrible things. You know, you see obviously dead bodies, people who are horribly wounded, you see all of that kind of thing. So you have to be able to have that toughness. But I think if you become too tough, you don't do the job so well, because I think it's important to still care. When the pictures of the children who had been killed by chemical weapons, I wasn't in Damascus, I was in London, and I was going through those pictures. I went through every frame of those pictures, and I cried. I cried to see those children choking and dying, and those little bodies in the shroud being put in the grave. And I know Marie cried when, you know, she told me about this baby in Homs who she had watched dying the day before she herself died. And I think that if you are so tough you don't care and you can't be moved, then you really shouldn't do the job, because it means that you're not a human being, and it means that you cannot convey to people what war is really like. You cannot convey to them the horror and misery of it. If you're conveying that it's a boy's own adventure and all very exciting, then that is nowhere near the truth, and that is a distortion of the truth. And particularly if our governments want to go to war, which I'm not always against, I'm not a pacifist, but then we have to know what it means. And that, I suppose, is the job of the war correspondent, to show what it means, what it's really like, so that when people make decisions, they make them with the knowledge. And afterwards, nobody can ever say, "We didn't know."